I Am the Great Horse by Catherine Roberts, Chapter 18, Alexander's Plan. After their telling off the previous day, our grooms were up before dawn. They fed us our pre-battle breakfast of barley soaked in honey, of which I managed only 2 mouthfuls, and groomed us until we shone. Tityos combed out my tail almost as carefully as Charm would have done, and checked my girth straps and bridle fastenings at least 10 times. All this fuss put me on edge. I had to nip him in the arm just to make him stop. Every horse in the lines knew we were getting ready for battle. You could feel the tension rippling in the air. Off in the haze of smoke that hung over our camp, the men were putting on armor and checking their weapons. Trumpets sounded and officers shouted orders. Foot soldiers jogged past to form neat squares on the edge of the plain. Cavalrymen came for their horses, and the lines emptied. By the time the sun rose, only we horses of the guard remained. The Amazons cantered past on their little horned horses painted with blue circles, and the guard came down with armfuls of spears and javelins. They propped these against a cart and stood nearby, talking in excited voices and looking over their shoulders. The grooms untied their horses and walked them up and down, ready for them to mount. Only Alexander had not yet arrived, so no one did. Tityos put a hand on my nose and whispered, "I'm sorry, old horse. I can't keep you out of this battle. If Charm were here, she'd find a way, but I'm not as brave as she is. I daren't defy the king. Just come back in one piece, in case Charm... just in case. Oh, where is the king? I can't stand this waiting." A man in battle-scarred armor strode toward us, and everyone stiffened. But it was only General Parmenio. He frowned at the guard. "No sign of him yet?" They shook their heads. "One of you go and fetch him, then. The men are ready. If we wait much longer, there won't be time to finish this battle before dark. Tell him we want to know what his plans are. Zeus! If Alexander doesn't come and lead us today, this is going to be a massacre." That could have meant one of 2 things. We were going to massacre the Persians. The Persians were going to massacre us. The guard glanced at one another. Hephaestion cleared his throat and said, "Alex said we weren't to disturb him, sir. He hasn't slept for 4 days. I think he's still in bed. He needs the rest." The general stared in disbelief at the king's pavilion. "You're telling me he's overslept today of all days? Ah, looks like I'll have to go and wake him up myself then." He strode off, grumbling under his breath. Finally, after the sun climbed much higher in the sky and even the guard were beginning to get worried, I smell Alexander's sherbet sweetness. I let out a ringing neigh of welcome, and Tityos clamps his hand over my nostrils in alarm. "Shh, Bucephalus! He'll be here—" Before Tityos can finish speaking, the king arrives, smiling. The circles have faded from around his eyes. He is wearing his reinforced Troy helmet with its white plumes, but he has left the Achilles armor in the baggage train. He has chosen to wear his old snake-haired breastplate, which means this is going to be a serious battle. He runs straight up to me and offers me a pastry left over from his breakfast, which I'm too excited to eat. I blow crumbs all over him. He laughs and springs onto my back in a great bound like he used to do back in Macedonia. I rear up high, catching his excitement, and Tityos ducks. "Don't just stand there, boy," Alexander says. "I've a battle to win. Hand me my javelins." Tityos hurries to obey, but as he passes up the javelins, he takes a deep breath and whispers, "Your Majesty, I've discovered something happened back at the camp while we were away visiting the Egyptian oracle. Charm might not have been eaten by a crocodile after all. See, General Parmenio arrested her because she tried to help Prince Arcas escape, and—" I am dancing around so much Alexander doesn't hear properly. He frowns down at Tityos. "What's that? Don't bother me with it now, boy. King Darius awaits." He gathers up my reins, tucks his spear and javelins under his arm, and trots me over to the guard. "Hurry up, gentlemen," he calls. Mount up! Let's show these Persians what we Macedonians are made of. Do you have a plan then, Alex? Hephaestion asks, trotting Patassios beside me. Alexander grins. Yes, I've got a plan. Even old Parmenio couldn't fault it. Stick close to me and ride as you've never ridden before. This is going to be the greatest battle of our lives. It takes some time to get everyone in position to Alexander's satisfaction. We trot up and down the ranks while he checks every division from several angles. He doesn't seem interested in what the Persians are doing, although out of the corner of my good eye, I can see the guard casting worried glances at the far side of the plain where the enemy is lining up. They have reason to be worried. The Persian herd stretches across the entire horizon, and we can hear their horses whinnying in the distance. They might not have 1,000,000, but they have many thousands more men and horses than we do. As I've said before, this is not good. Finally, everyone is where Alexander wants him. I wonder if he's had too much sun. The phalanx is at the back, quite a long way behind everyone else. Most of our cavalry are on the wings, curving almost in a circle and facing the wrong way. Sideways, too, rather than facing the Persians. There's a line of foot soldiers at the front with their long pikes, but not many. Some of the cavalry is with us at the front where they should be, and the Amazons are hiding in the hills to pick off the enemy as they flee. But we're not nearly a big enough herd to dominate the Persians. We will have to be very fierce. Nervous sweat gleams on our necks as I halt in front of the troops so Alexander can make a speech. We chew our bits and arch our necks. Alexander hands his javelins and shield to Hephaestion and rides me a few steps forward to face his men. I make myself huge. Behind me, the guard line up knee to knee as if they're on parade. Patassios, handsome, faithful, and my best friend, carrying Hephaestion. Borealis, a bit slow, but comfortingly solid, carrying Leonidas. Xanthus, trouble in the lines, excellent in battle, carrying Craterus. Arion quietly does his job, carrying Attalus. Hades, small but quick on his feet, carrying Iolaus. Apollo, still a bit vain, but has learned how to fight, carrying Perdiccas. Harpenna, amazing fighter, carrying Ptolemy. Electra, my beautiful filly, fighting her very first battle, carrying Demetrius and the Achilles shield. There's a hush. Even the Persians at the far side of the plain go quiet. We are going to win today, Alexander begins, and there is a huge cheer from our herd. When it dies away, he says a lot of boring things about honor and glory, which make the men nod and look fierce. Then he prays to his father Zeus and draws his sword to personally make the pre-battle sacrifice. I snort as goat's blood sprays across my nose. Ugh. The men give Alexander another great cheer as he retrieves his weapons from Hephaestion. When he whirls me around to take my place at the front of the army, all the men behind us ready their spears, and all the horses and foot soldiers make themselves huge. A whole army making itself huge at once. I have never, in all my years of battle, seen that before. The excitement infects me. I begin to shiver even though it's so hot, and every single one of my muscles goes tense. On my cloth, Alexander is tense too. He holds me to a walk as we advance, but I am ready to gallop at the slightest shift of his weight. The Persian herd is getting slowly closer. We can hear their men calling insults across the plain. None of our herd replies. We advance in silence and with strict discipline. It's like a big parade. The Persian horses kick up dust, which makes their herd seem even bigger. I suppose we're making dust too, because some of the men in the phalanx behind us cough, but we don't make so much of it. Come on, Alexander mutters as we get closer. Charge, you Persian cowards! Why don't they charge? There's King Darius, Hephaestion says, nodding toward the chariots in the center of the Persian line, their wheel blades flashing, hiding behind that group. Yes. Alexander still does not shift his weight. We won't be able to see much once the charge starts. Remember where Darius is, gentlemen. Watch for my signal. There are a few tense nods. The other horses are as ready to gallop as I am, but disciplined enough to obey their riders. The excitement is getting to Electra, though, who goes sideways in her eagerness to pass me. Demetrius is having trouble holding both her and the big Achilles shield. I swing my head at the filly and give her a little squeal. It makes all the horses jump. Still, we walk. The Persians ahead of us are drifting sideways, trying to see how many troops we have behind us. Because our men are curved back in a circle, they can't see them properly. Maybe Alexander is cleverer than I thought. Your plan's working, Alex, Hephaestion calls, excited. If they keep this up, they'll soon be in the rough ground at the edge, and their horses and chariots will be in trouble. The Persian herd is so close, now I can smell their horses. The enemy directly opposite us have spotted Alexander's helmet. They point at us and shout. Then one of their horses leaps forward, and a whole section of their herd at the end of their line breaks away and follows it. Trumpets are blare in the distance. A shudder goes through Alexander. He hisses, "Yes! They're falling for it, gentlemen! Be ready for my signal!" A ripple of anticipation goes down our line, but Alexander's weight stays in the exact center of my back. He raises his first javelin and signals to the officers behind him. The enemy and their great cloud of dust have already gone around us to engage the troops behind us. Screams, shouts, and panicky sword clashes suggest they found our phalanx and rather more men than they bargained for. Still, Alexander holds my rein tightly. He makes more signals, and the trumpets pass them on. Then Hephaestion shouts, "The chariots, Alex! Look out!" Racing toward us are pairs of crazy Persian horses, completely out of control, dragging chariots with blades flashing on their wheels. As the dust billows around them, they head for our front line of foot soldiers who melt out of their path and let them through to meet a phalanx hiding in the dust behind with a hedge of pikes. There are yells of alarm from the Persian drivers who can't pull up in time, crashes and thuds, and the screams of dying horses. This is too much for Electra. She takes 3 huge leaps and breaks from the guard into a wild gallop with her head in the air and the bit between her teeth. Demetrius drops his javelins and almost loses the Achilles shield, too. Alexander curses, then shouts, "Follow me!" At last he eases my rein and leans slightly forward. It's what I've been waiting for. I leap into a gallop, chasing my runaway filly. "Ha-la-la-la-la-la!" Alexander yells, putting his heels into my sides and heading me at the Persian line. Behind us, the guard echoes the war cry, "Ha-la-la-la-la-la! Ha-la-la-la-la-la!" And there's a great thunder of hooves as everyone follows us. Oh, this is wild! I can barely see. Dust is everywhere. The noise of the battle is incredible. Ghosts whirl around me as men and horses die, but the plain is beautifully level. I have Alexander on my back, and I gallop through it all fearlessly. I catch up with Electra and bite her on the neck. She puts her head down and feels the bit again. Demetrius's relieved face flashes past us as he gets her back under control and takes his place behind us with the Achilles shield. We form a tight wedge, as we've been trained to do, with me at the front and the cavalry behind, so closely packed that I can hear the men's shields knocking together and feel the hot breath of the other horses on my hind quarters. There's going to be a few sore heels after this, but no one dares tread on mine. Patassios is beside me, Hephaestion's elbow brushing Alexander's as they sight on the Persian line and balance their javelins for the throw. Our riders exchange cultish grins. Then they launch their javelins through the dust in perfect unison and make 2 more Persian ghosts. "Now, gentlemen," Alexander yells, and does a strange thing. Instead of urging me through the Persian line to trample and kill more of the enemy, he digs his right knee hard into my ribs and clamps his right leg against my cloth, dragging my reins hard left. against my neck. I swerve at once, feeling the wrench along my tendons, and head off at an angle along the startled enemy line. Patassios comes with me, tossing his head in surprise. The others make the turn behind, still in our wedge. It is perfect until one of the blade-wheeled chariots without a driver appears out of the dust right beside me. The Persian horses, wild-eyed and flat out, are on a collision course. Hephaestion yells a bad word and hauls Patassios off to the side to give me room to maneuver. Alexander's weight shifts a little and his knees turn me just in time. The nearest horse brushes my flank and the blade on the wheel hisses past my blind spot. I leap to avoid it and feel a fierce sting like a mosquito bite on the side of my hind leg. Then it's gone, and I forget the pain. But there's a frantic neigh behind me, and a gray horse tumbles head over heels in the dust with a horrible crunch of bone. "Attalus is down!" Hephaestion yells. Attalus rolls clear and springs to his feet, but Arion is still thrashing on the ground behind us. As we race on, the chariot, now on one wheel, barges past the others and somehow gets through without hitting anyone else, the Persian horses dragging it on its side. "His horse broke a leg," Demetrius yells, catching up with us on foaming Electra. "Attalus is on his feet. Do we go back for him, Alex?" Alexander does not look around. "No, stay with me. Close up. I'm going for Darius." He urges me even faster toward the dim shapes of the enemy chariots in the center where the Persian line is breaking up because of everyone going sideways earlier. "Second javelins, everyone!" Alexander yells. "Make them count, gentlemen!" He jerks on my cloth and his javelin flies into a Persian chest, knocking the rider backward off his horse and releasing his ghost. I squeal in triumph. Now the guard and the cavalry all throw their final javelins. There's a hissing like rain and more Persians fall. Some of their horses get hit too, but there's no time to be sad because suddenly there are enemies all around us. Alexander is stabbing with his spear. Hephaestion and Patassios are fighting fiercely beside us, and I have to leap to avoid the long, curved Persian blades. The gap Arion left has been filled by another horse. Its rider is Laomedon, who rode Electra before Demetrius needed her. He flashes Alexander a quick grin and grimly stabs a Persian with his spear. I whinny at the little bay he is riding to get closer and leap to carry Alexander out of range of another scimitar. I collect a few cuts. None of them hurt. That's what it's like in battle, as if a small man-cold is slapping you from all sides. Irritating, but not painful. At least not at the time. I look after my rider so well, no enemy blade or spear touches Alexander. I have to keep snorting to clear my nose. The sweat pours off my sides. There's white foam on my neck. I cannot see more than 5 horses around me, though the noise and the screams tell me there are thousands close by. Then another chariot comes into view, and I break into a fresh sweat as I remember what happened to Arion. But this chariot still has a driver, and there is an important-looking Persian standing behind him, gripping the sides and shouting orders. He's tall, with dark skin and curly black whiskers. His helmet is wrapped in blue and white cloth. Gold glitters at his wrists, and from the sides of the chariot, I can smell him from here. He smells of fear. When Alexander sees him, he hauls my head around, hurting my mouth. "King Darius!" he yells in his shrill voice, drawing his sword. The man in the chariot turns his head, and his dark eyes widen in alarm. He shouts a warning, and his driver hauls the horses around and whips them into a gallop. Horns sound in the Persian line, and gaps open up around us with shouts of confusion. More trumpets blare. This time they're ours. Fierce shouting comes from the direction of our lines, and I see our phalanx with lowered pikes charging through the dust after a herd of fleeing Persian cavalry. "The Persians are retreating, Alex!" Hephaestion shouts, turning Patassios to see better. "You've done it! I think you've actually done it!" The guard cheer. Alexander shakes his head impatiently. "It's not over yet. Don't let Darius get away. Guard, follow me!" He urges me after the chariot. I'm tired, and so are the other horses. We try our best, but the Persians surrounding the chariot fight fiercely and keep getting in the way. Hephaestion gets left behind and yells as an enemy spear pierces his shoulder. Alexander's head snaps around. Hephaestion! We have galloped no more than a few strides after the fleeing chariot, yet he turns me back at once to help. But it is not time yet for Hephaestion's ghost to leave him. He grits his teeth, pulls out the spear, and keeps it, since he's already broken his own. You go on, Alex, he shouts, clasping his wound. I'll be fine. Alexander casts an anguished glance after Darius's fleeing chariot, but stays to examine Hephaestion's shoulder. Can you still fight, my friend? Hephaestion nods while I nip Tassios on the nose for letting his rider get wounded. Good, then stay here and help General Parmenio clean up the stragglers. The rest of you, come with me. But as Alexander wheels me around to resume the chase after King Darius, Perdiccas yells, Look out, gentlemen, behind you! That's the trouble when the enemy is in retreat, and you've galloped so far into their lines. All those who charged past you during the battle then turn around and come back toward you going the other way. We whirl as one to find ourselves facing a whole herd of Persians, their horses draped with bundles that spill golden coins and cups behind them in the dust. One of them is leading a mule with a jeweled box strapped to its neck. It's one of our mules, the nerve! Others have the Persian women we took captive at Issus, sitting behind them on their horses, clinging to their waists. When they recognize Alexander, the Persians check their horses in dismay and stare around wildly. The women scream. Alexander is already panting from the battle, but his breathing gets even faster. He casts a final frustrated look at Darius's vanishing chariot, gathers up my reins, and shouts, Those men have been looting our camp. Don't let them get away. They've stolen my Iliad. The guard and those of the cavalry still with us growl in their throats. Alexander grips his sword tighter and heads me straight for the Persians leading the mule. The thief pales, drops the mule's rein, and turns his horse to flee, but I'm too quick for it. I bite it on the neck to drive it back, and Alexander's sword flashes across the Persian's throat. His ghost lurches from his body while enemy blood sprays my ears and Alexander's cheek. The other Persians have recovered from the shock of coming face to face with the Macedonian king and are fighting furiously. They have the stolen captives in the middle of their group, and I can smell Prince Arcas among them. One of the Persians has the man-colt perched on his horse's withers. I don't think Alexander has noticed the man-colt yet, but Arcas stares in horror as my rider kills Persian after Persian with his sword until the blade is red and both he and I are soaked with enemy blood. Dust sticks to it and turns us both brown. Some of our herd also give up their ghosts because the Persian thieves know that surrendering won't save their lives. Finally, though, they are beaten, and the few survivors huddle with the stolen captives, ringed by our cavalry. Gold litters the plain like flowers. My hooves chink on it as Alexander walks me forward. A dented cup rolls away as I kick it. He rides me right up to the Persian holding Arcas, wipes an arm across his face, which just smudges the dust and blood, making it look worse, and stares at the prince. The man-colt is very brave and meets his gaze. Leaving already, Arcas? Alexander says in his quiet, dangerous tone. What's the matter? Don't I treat you well enough? Not hurt our prince, please, said the Persian, holding him. We think great King Darius win the battle. We take his children back to him, that is all. The great king did win the battle, Alexander snaps. You're looking at him. He gives the two sobbing princesses, who are still clinging to their rescuers' waists, a disgusted look. Then he turns his attention to Arcas. Where are your grandmother and Lady Barsine? Granny Sissy Gambus not come, Arcas says, sitting up very straight. She say she too old for galloping around battlefields. She say she wait for father to escort her back himself. Auntie Barsine stay to look after her. Alexander shakes his head. Is an old woman the only one with any sense around here? He shouts. You could have all been killed. Hephaestion, you take Prince Arcas back to camp. See him and the princesses safely back to their pavilion and double the guard. And someone catch that stupid mule before it trops off into the hills with my Iliad. One of the cavalrymen goes after the mule. Hephaestion takes Arcas up onto Ptasios with him, but hesitates, watching Alexander uneasily. The others put the Macedonian dead across the backs of the spare horses. They leave the Persian bodies where they lie because there are so many of them. A few loose horses are rounded up before they can get lost in the dust. Alexander shakes his head at the 3 Persian thieves left alive. They've been dragged off their horses and forced to their knees in front of me. Please, King Iskander, says the man who was caught with Arcas, spare us. We only do what we think best for our great king's family. He very upset when his wife died. He worry about them. Alexander scowls and rides me so close to the prisoners that my hooves stamp near their knees. They put their arms over their heads and cower away from me and from my flat ears and snapping teeth. You were stupid, and you've delayed me. If Darius gets away, it'll be your fault. You don't deserve to live, but since you've begged for your lives and I am a greater king than Darius, I'll return the favor. He showed my wounded at Issus. Then, if we don't catch King Darius tonight, maybe you can find your way back to him and give him a message for me. The Persians turn a funny color as they realize what he means. The Macedonians seize them and stretch their arms out on the ground. Alexander backs me up to give them space. Then he gives a sharp nod. A sword flashes out twice for each man. The Persian women cry out in protest. Arcas makes a small sound in his throat and buries his face in Hephaestion's shoulder. His sisters scream at Alexander in Persian. I don't know what they're saying, but it sounds to me like mare squealing. The prisoners stare at their severed hands lying in the dust among the spilled gold, as if they can't believe what Alexander has just ordered done to them. Blood pours from their wrists. Even the Macedonians grimace as they tie rags around the bloody stumps to stop the mutilated men from bleeding to death before they can reach the camp. Alexander speaks to the 3 prisoners as if nothing has happened. Tell of Darius, I am the great king of Persia now. Tell him that so far I have treated his family as my family, and his son as my son. But if he tries to raise another army against me, then I will give his daughters to my men to use as slaves and kill the boy. If Darius wants to live, he must surrender himself to me. Otherwise, I will hunt him to the ends of the earth. Go. The handless Persians stagger through the gap our cavalry makes for them and stumble off into the dust. Arcas stares in disbelief at Alexander, blinks rapidly, and is sick down Ptasios' shoulder. Chasing King Darius. As the sun sank into the dust and turned everything around us red, I began to look forward to my role. But Alexander turned my head to the east, pulled my ear, and whispered, Come on, Bucephalus, I need your speed now. He put his bloody sword back into its scabbard, called the guard to follow, and dug his heels into my sides. We chased King Darius well into that night, overtaking some of his fleeing herd and passing his abandoned chariot. Alexander did not even pause to draw his sword, so it was just as well the frightened Persians took off across the fields when they saw us coming. I found my second wind and forgot my wounds as we galloped through the littered bodies of men and horses. I was determined to do better than Xanthus did after Issus. My hind leg was stiff where the chariot blade had cut me, and the other 3 felt as if they had boulders tied to them, but I did not slacken my pace. There were piles of dung smelling of aura in the road, and every time I found one, a fresh surge of energy kept me galloping onward. Eventually, though, my breath stopped coming so easily, and bubbles of something hot and bitter kept blocking my throat. If Alexander had asked me for more speed, I would have found it for him, but he finally noticed I was bleeding from the nose and pulled me back to a trot. There were some big, round-roofed huts near the river, and he turned me toward them. As soon as we stopped, my knees gave way, and Alexander had to pretend that he had told me to settle down. He slipped off me, held on to my head while I drew shuddering breaths past the blood in my nose and whispered, "Oh, Bucephalus, don't you dare die on me, horse! Even Darius isn't worth that." Meanwhile, the other horses stood around me with drooping heads, heaving rib cages, and flaring nostrils. The men dismounted in relief, as wobbly-kneed as we were. Some of them went to investigate the huts, while the others led us to the river for a drink and found us some hay. Alexander tended me himself. He wiped the blood from my nose with his tunic and led me up and down until the stiffness went from my legs. Then he took the guard into one of the huts, while the rest of the men curled up on the ground nearby. Scenting another of Aura's dung piles nearby, I sent one last weary whinny into the night, but she did not reply. How Aura led the Persian herd. It is still dark when Alexander mounts me again. We trot along the river road by moonlight, following Aura's trail. The blood has stopped coming out of my nose, though my hind leg is now very stiff, so I am lame behind. As the sun rises, we reach a town. Its garrison is deserted, so when Alexander and I lead our weary herd through the gates of Arbela, there is no one left for us to fight. This is just as well, because we are only a small herd now. We have not only fought a fierce battle, but have galloped through most of the night, and we must look a sight. The humans who live in this town are still scared of us, though. They run into their houses and slam the doors. Alexander stares wearily after them and trots me to the palace. It is deserted. Our hooves echo in the marble courtyard. A fountain splashes into a pink marble bowl. The smell of water makes me thirsty. Doors bang in the wind. A few goats and dogs wander loose in the yard. Some women and old men creep out of the dark doorways and lie down in the dirt before me and Alexander, pressing their foreheads to the ground. "Where's King Darius?" Alexander asks, but they don't seem to understand, so he calls Laomedon forward to translate. "They say the great king's gone, Alex," Laomedon says, after questioning the slaves. "He and the remains of his army headed into the mountains last night. 4, maybe 5,000 men. We won't catch them now." Alexander does not seem surprised. He sighs and rides me around the courtyard. My hooves echo in the silence, and my stride is broken by lameness. Clop, 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 clop. I'm so tired I can barely hold my head off the ground, but as we pass the stables, I catch a familiar scent inside. Aura! I summon the last of my strength and send her a ringing whinny. A few of the cavalry horses who came with us on the chase whinny back. I fidget, wanting to sniff the dung piles I can see lying over by the entrance, but Alexander won't let me. That is when I hear Aura whinny back. Very faint. All the horses of the guard flicker their ears. I whinny again and dance sideways, grabbing my bit in my teeth. Alexander smooths my mane and frowns at the stables. He tells Iolaus, "Go and check inside." Iolaus hands Hades' reins to Demetrius and stamps past us, grumbling that he's not a groom. All the guard are tired and grumpy, so Alexander ignores this. We wait. The slaves stay quiet, with their faces still pressed to the ground. I manage to get my nose into the fountain bowl and gulp up a few mouthfuls. The water is warm. Then Iolaus comes back out of the stables, leading Aura. Her head hangs low. Her lovely, dappled coat is crusted in dried sweat. Her flanks and sides are covered in whip marks, raw and bleeding. She's limping too, with little snorts at the pain each time she puts her bad leg down. She looks twice my age, and that's a lot of years. If it weren't for her smell and her familiar whinny, I wouldn't have recognized her. "I think it's the mare the Persian queen's slave stole, Alex." But Iolaus sounds doubtful and looks to Demetrius for confirmation. Demetrius leaps off Electra, abandoning my filly in the middle of the yard, and rushes across to take Aura's head. "Oh, my poor, brave little mare," he says, stroking her nose and running his hand down her swollen leg. "What have those horrid Persians done to you?" I nicker to Aura, who raises her head a little and manages a small nicker back. One of the kneeling slaves says something, and Laomedon translates. This man says King Darius was riding the gray mare when he arrived. He must have abandoned his chariot at his camp and changed horses again here. How about that, Alex? One of our own mares helped the Persian king get away. Not without a fight, by the look of it, Alexander mutters. Bucephalus knew she was in there, didn't you, old horse? Was that why you nearly killed yourself last night, chasing after Darius, you silly horse? I should have guessed you were after a mare rather than the Persian king. He looks around the yard and sighs. Laomedon, tell those Persian slaves to get up and make themselves useful. These horses need someone to look after them until our grooms get here, and I could do with a bath. The battle at Gaugamela was the dustiest I have ever been in, and the first time our herd has ever won against a much bigger herd. But many of our horses had their manes shaved off in mourning for their lost riders, and Attalus, who had survived the battle on foot, cut off a lock of his mane in mourning for Arion, who never got up again. Groom gossip said the plain at Gaugamela stank of rotten Persian dead for days. Because so many of them had died, there was no one left from the enemy herd to collect up the bodies for their god. Even crows get full eventually. This is how we dominated the Persians at Gaugamela. Persian prisoners? None, except slaves found in their baggage train. Persian dead? 50,000, including Ochus's mother the night the moon went out. Macedonian dead? 1,500. Horses dead? 1,000, including Arion, who had to be put down after his leg was broken by the runaway chariot. Very sad. Prisoners spared or rescued? Aura, the 3 Persians who had their hands chopped off, and Prince Ochus. But considering what Tydeus tried to tell Alexander before the battle, I think Prince Ochus could soon be in very big trouble.